ever feel like, I don't know, like your internal engine's just redlining, like your heart's a drum solo, can't breathe, and suddenly everything like feels like it's ending.
Oh, yeah.
That, my friend, is the wild ride of a panic attack.
Right.
And trust me, you are not alone.
Yeah.
And we've got some really fascinating research on this that you sent over. So
Mhm.
let's unpack it. What do you think?
Absolutely. And I think the most important thing to lead with here is that, you know, while these experiences are so intense, they're also incredibly treatable.
Okay.
So let's really break that down. Like, let's explore what it is, why it happens, and most importantly, what you can actually do about it.
Okay. So the material you sent really interesting. It kind of like really drove home that this is not just your average like deadline day stress. You know,
Right.
this is a whole different beast.
It's a whole different category, yeah. We're talking about a perfect storm of physical symptoms. Your heart's racing, you might be sweating, feeling dizzy, maybe even some numbness or tingling. But I think the real kicker is the mental component.
Oh, for sure.
This overwhelming fear, the sense of unreality, and for a lot of people, this terrifying feeling of like impending doom. Like, this is it.
Yeah, that fear of dying thing, the source mentioned that,
Yeah.
which thankfully it also makes clear is not an actual risk during a panic attack.
Right,
Even if your brain is screaming otherwise, you know.
right.
Talk about a cool trick.
Yeah. It's so important to remember that our bodies are really hardwired for survival, right?
Right.
And a panic attack, you can almost think of it like a misfire of that fight or flight response,
Okay.
like a smoke alarm going off when there's no fire.
Right. Right. So, okay, how long does this false alarm usually last? You know, asking for a friend.
Well, here's a reassuring thought. They tend to be surprisingly brief. So most panic attacks, they peak within 10 minutes, and they usually fade away entirely within a half hour.
Okay. Yeah, no, that is reassuring, I gotta say. But the research also mentioned there can be some lingering effects, right? Like you don't just like snap back to normal.
Yeah, that's true, you know.
Yeah.
It's not always an instant recovery. Some people experience this kind of emotional hangover. They feel drained, on edge, just off for a while after that main event. And it makes sense. You know, your body's just kind of gone through this ringer and it needs a little time to reset.
Right. Yeah, I can see that. And I mean, sometimes these attacks, it feels like they just appear out of nowhere. But then other times, it seems like there are these triggers,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, absolutely.
Like the materials mentioned things like driving, being in crowds,
Yeah,
even just like the thought of leaving the house,
yeah.
you know?
And that's a really critical distinction, I think. When we start talking about triggers and patterns, we're moving into the realm of what we call panic disorder. And so it's not just having these panic attacks. It's when the fear of having them starts to really take over and it dictates your choices, it limits your life.
So it becomes this kind of like vicious cycle,
Exactly. Yeah. And that's where I think understanding treatment becomes so important.
right? Okay, so the source talked about a few different approaches.
Yeah.
One that kind of stuck out to me was this cognitive behavioral therapy CBT.
Yes, very popular.
Is that basically like retraining your brain to like handle those panicky thoughts?
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. Imagine learning to hit the pause button on those thoughts as they come up, those spiraling thoughts.
Right.
And then actually, with practice, replacing them with more balanced, realistic ones. That's really the essence of CBT.
So it's not about like ignoring those feelings, but changing like how you react to them.
Exactly. Because we can't just, white knuckle our way through life and just ignore all of our feelings.
Right.
We need to learn how to actually shift the way we relate to them. And then there's exposure therapy. And I know that can sound a little intense, but
Yeah, a little bit.
it's really not about, throwing somebody into the deep end of their fears. It's a very gradual process where you're facing those feared situations in a very controlled, safe environment with your therapist as your co-pilot. And it really helps to kind of dismantle that hold that those triggers have over you.
Okay, yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. So it's kind of like you're like dipping your toe in the shallow end of the pool before you have to like, go do a cannonball in the deep end.
I like that analogy.
Right. Okay. And then the source also mentioned that medication can also play a role here.
Absolutely. And it can be really helpful, especially in managing, the intensity of those symptoms, but it's really important to note that it's very rarely a standalone solution. Think of it more as a support system while you're doing that deeper work, in therapy and with these other lifestyle changes.
Right. Got to like fix the alarm system, not just like
Yeah.
keep hitting the snooze button forever.
Exactly. 1,000%. Yeah. And I think something that we can't underestimate is the power of building up our own internal toolkit as well. Relaxation techniques, mindfulness exercises, things like deep breathing, meditation. These are like giving yourself panic-busting
Yeah.
superpowers.
Yeah. No, I'm really picking up on this idea of like taking back control.
hmm
It's not about being like powerless against these attacks. It's actually like pretty empowering when you look at it that way.
It absolutely is. Knowledge is power. And you've already taken that first step by, diving into this with us today.
Yeah. No, this has been eye-opening, honestly. I'm kind of blown away. But here's a thought it's been like bouncing around in my head.
Mm.
Do you think there's a connection between, how fast-paced our world has become and like always on and the rise of, things like anxiety and panic attacks?
Now, that is a question worth exploring further,
Right.
perhaps in another deep dive.
I like it.